There was a legit period where I'm like, am I looking at 160,000 felonies?
The state appealed again, but this time to the Supreme Court.
So they're using an argument for something that we don't do to say what we do is illegal.
The issue with Chevron, while it started out as a good thing, it did not foresee that agencies would just continue to abuse their power and expand and make these arbitrary rules. If they grant their motion to just revoke the injunction and call it a day, there's not going to be a grace period. They're not going to give us a year's sell-through time. There's not going to be any of that. It's over. So, Lukas, normally in active litigation, you don't really talk about your lawsuit and that kind of thing. So we're not getting into the nitty-gritty. We're not giving any secrets away. Everything we're going to talk about is public knowledge.
Correct.
Like anybody can find it. And actually, I spoke to a reporter yesterday that told me they have an alert set up so that they get an update whenever anything happens on our lawsuit. So
that sounds fun.
Yeah, and she was one of the many people who have said, "Hey, what's going on with your lawsuit?" So I thought it would be fun if we started off with me, because you were here, I was not here, and so just asking you.
We were working with you at the time as a consultant.
Yes, correct.
You were not in-house.
So I spoke to you about it on the phone, but I wasn't like in-house. So walk me through it. What was it like? How were you feeling?
So we went through the 2021 legislative session and sort of got through unscathed by the skin of our teeth, right? That was really one of our first pushes on the legislative side and trying to figure everything out and working with different politicians and just trying to keep what we were doing alive, right? And we made it through the session. We made it through the session without getting killed, which was great. And around mid-October, I think it was October 15th, I wake up and I've got a ton of missed calls, a ton of texts. My phone is blowing up. People from industry, lawyers, our own people, everybody.
Random lawyers?
No, it's lawyers that we had relationships with. It was lawyers that we knew well and we had relationships with, and this thing kind of exploded very quickly. So what happened, and we'll pop up what essentially ended up on the DSHS website. So in Texas, the Department of State Health Services oversees the Hemp program. And I have to be careful making too many assumptions or saying too many things, but Department of State Health Services at some point determined it was proper to put a language on their website stating that Delta 8, specifically Delta 8, and the sale of Delta 8 was illegal. And my understanding was it was also retroactive. So it put us in a position where we had some serious legal issues. And after talking with our attorneys, we were told to cease selling the products because
for how long?
Until we could resolve this on the court side and essentially get an injunction. So we stopped selling immediately. We stopped selling the products.
Shut it down.
And the interesting thing about Texas is even if DSHS is wrong and caused us damages, we can't legally sue for those damages.
Yeah, we actually roped off the products. Yeah, in our warehouse.
The products I think they had like caution tape on them, and we had everything sealed off.
Signs saying
Like a
do not
crime
sell.
scene?
No, we were told the products can't leave, nobody can touch them, they have to be cordoned off, and we took it seriously. Like, at the time, it was unsure, is this 100,000 felonies I'm looking at? What is this?
And if it's retroactive, are you thinking, oh my God, we have to give back whatever money we made off of this?
I wasn't so much worried about that as, am I sitting on, because we were selling, and the way that the language was written, it was retroactive, and it seemed like each transaction would be counted as his own issue. I mean, there was a legit period where I'm like, am I looking at 160,000 felonies? And
do you think other companies were just running around throwing everything in the dumpster?
No, everybody else was still selling.
Oh, okay.
We were literally the only company that stopped selling. Most of the industry at the time sort of was hesitantly continuing to sell, even with this going on. And so we were singled out. Because we were the largest in the state. And so we were a target, and we were also the only people that really at the time, I think, had the ability to fight it. So immediately we went out the gate trying to get a temporary restraining order against DSHS in the state.
And just talking about DSHS dishes, This all ties in with the recent Chevron Deference case that was overturned by the Supreme Court last week, and we can talk about that later and how it ties into this.
Yeah, I actually want to hear your opinion on how it does tie into this and the impact it has, because that's very fascinating. So we, right out the gate, as we cordoned off all the products, had everything sort of isolated, ceased sales at the time, we went after a TRO.
Did you just send everybody home?
No, at the time we had other products, and so we were still selling other products, but we essentially lost, at the time I'd say it was probably 60 to 70% of our business just immediately ceased, halted, done. And so it almost put us out of business. It was pretty brutal. So the court side of things, the legal side of things, was literally to save our business. And so we went after a temporary restraining order. That was denied. Now, it's sort of an emergency action that we pursued. And my understanding is the reason as to why it was denied was those are typically reserved for life and death situations.
Right.
It's typically in whether somebody's life is at risk in a scenario. That's typically why TROs get granted in an emergency capacity. So the initial one was denied because there wasn't really any life or death issue.
Life-threatening emergency.
Correct. It was a financial issue. So then we pursued it further to the injunction, right? We're going after the injunction now. And it took a couple weeks, but we did get granted an injunction. The trial was really fascinating, the hearing, and you can still view it online, and there's sort of some comical parts to it. You know, the other attorney's phone was going off and all. It was crazy. It was wild. I remember it was all done on Zoom.
And I think like a lot of people were watching. I mean, I was watching in Florida.
At one point, I think we hit like 1,200 people watching it. And I asked the attorneys involved and some of the people involved, I'm like, you know, how many people usually watches these? And they literally told me like 3 or 4. The highest count they'd ever seen maybe was like 10 people.
You broke their
They had
internet.
1,200 people watching this. So in the context of that court case, this was a very high profile case. I mean, this was hundreds of times more viewers than what they were used to. And so it was obviously right out the gate, it was a very, very, high profile case. There was a lot of people involved, a lot of businesses involved. The industry, even though it was small at the time, it was still growing rapidly. There was a lot of people that had committed to being a part of it, that had a lot of money in products and inventory. We did, and it had almost put us out of business. And so 2 weeks later, the judge was gracious enough to understand our argument and grant us the injunction that essentially allowed this market to be where it is today.
So, and I say this to people all the time, the Hometown Hero lawsuit is what has allowed everybody in Texas to conduct business.
Correct. The entire industry within Texas, all of the products, all of the hemp products are legal and on shelf because of this lawsuit. Yeah. This lawsuit is what paved the way for the entire hemp industry in Texas.
So given that I was not internal to the company at the time and working as a consultant, kudos to the Hometown Hero team for taking this on.
We had no choice. And it was obvious that nobody else really had the ability or the resources to do it. So it was really on us at the time, and we took that seriously. So, even from the very beginning of this industry within Texas, we sort of helped create it and helped perpetuate it, and here we are. 3 years later, and this is a multi-billion-dollar industry within Texas that is still tied up in a lot of legal issues and everything, but it still exists. And we're very grateful that it still exists. It's not perfect. It's still a work in progress, but it's continued to evolve and continue to get bigger. And it's a great industry. We're very proud and happy to be a part of it, and especially in a way that allows it to be here.
So I know that there were some companies that donated. My friend Jeff reminded me that he donated the other day. Reminded me the other day that he had donated. And I know that there was support. Did you feel like there was overwhelming support for the lawsuit, or people were kind of checked out?
I don't think a lot of people understood it. There was a lot of misinformation at the time. And that typically happens with stuff like this. And also, we weren't as public. We were much more low key. We weren't putting out videos. We weren't really talking to people. The people that knew us and knew what was going on were really just our industry friends, right, and family. And so it was a small group of people. It's not like what it is today. Now, it's a very different animal today, and everybody knows kind of about this and about us and all that. But at the time, nobody really had a clue. And so when we actually pulled off an injunction, it was a really big deal. People were like, wait, what? And so that then paved the way.
Was it the first big lawsuit in the hemp space? Because I don't remember one earlier than 2021.
On the state level, yes. Yeah. On the federal level, there might have been, I think there was some stuff around the post office where they got sued, and there were some other ones. But it was the lawsuit that sort of set the groundwork for really, I think, the entire country to understand that it could defend itself on the hemp side. And the really interesting part about it is the injunction being granted, and every step of the way, so this has been going on for 3 years now, every step of the way where the judge has upheld the injunction essentially confirms that we are correct in our argument, right? If we weren't, they would take it away and they would tell us to prove our case. But since really the first point where they could grant an injunction, it's been granted and it's been upheld the entire way. And so we've now been through, I guess, the normal courts. We've been through the appellate courts. We've been through the Supreme Court. We're now back in the Supreme Court for the second time. I'm not sure if everybody knows that. We're now back in the Supreme Court for the second time. This lawsuit goes beyond just the hemp products. It goes beyond a state agency overstepping their bounds and really trying to create a law outside of a legislative session.
So the legislative session didn't go the way certain people in the legislature wanted, correct. And then suddenly we have this legal thing.
Correct.
We have
and it was an obvious play. There were certain people that were not happy the way the legislative session went, and that we ended up sort of not being outlawed, right? What we did was not deemed to be illegal. And so this was then viewed as a play. Now what's interesting is we didn't know, I didn't learn the full backstory of this until quite a bit later, of essentially the state decided to change some of their language, change some of their wording, and also amend the existing drug laws within Texas. And there was some really nefarious things done that were really fascinating. And so when the state typically tries to change drug laws, they have to submit a document. So a lot of journalists, a lot of lawyers have software that will be triggered by keywords as laws are being proposed and passed. And so as this legislative process is happening, you've got people that are tracking all of this stuff with keyword searches, right? And so as a keyword hits, it'll flag it and it'll notify them, hey, there's something coming through around hemp, right? We'll use hemp as an example. So the state at the time, and I was told this was the first time that anybody had ever seen this, the state at the time filed an unsearchable image in regards to them wanting to amend the drug laws.
Yes.
And it was done in a way that it was not searchable. So all these people that would get typically notified with the word hemp as a trigger, it didn't notify anybody.
Right.
And around the same time, there was a public hearing regarding this change in the drug laws. And even though the state said that they made it public and they made it so people knew what was going on and they could show up, nobody showed up. Which is, if you've ever been to any kind of hemp thing in Texas, we'll use the Senate hearing recently, there was probably well over 100 people showed up.
Yes.
Well over 100, probably a couple hundred people showed up in support of hemp in Texas. And this has always been the case. The very first hearing that I ever went to in Texas regarding DSHS, there was easily over 100 people that showed up just for hemp. Hemp is a big deal in Texas. Anything around cannabis in Texas is a big deal. And so the public is very vocal about it in Texas, and we have to be. And so there is still very much of a prohibitionist stance in Texas around cannabis, around marijuana, around hemp, and it's deemed as something that is potentially dangerous in the state. For a variety of reasons, it's not looked on favorably within Texas, right? We aren't Colorado, we aren't California.
Thank God.
When all of this sort of went down and we started learning more about sort of some of the nefarious stuff that was done behind the scenes, it became obvious this was...
Wait, nefarious is like a big word. You sure you want to go with nefarious?
I mean, they used an image to make it so nobody could see what was going on.
I don't like ascribing malice to something when, like, incompetence will do.
No. It was done on purpose.
Okay.
It was done on purpose. And there's no way to argue it. How can you say that it wasn't done nefariously when they literally used an image so nobody could search it? They hadn't done that before, right? I was told it may be the first time on record that this had been done in Texas.
Yeah, well, that's fair.
You can't say that was accidental.
Yeah, no, that's fair. That's fair.
And if you go through and look at some of the arguments, it makes sense, right? Like in the case, they're arguing that Delta 8 is synthetic. Delta 8 is not synthetic. And you've got the documentation from the federal side to prove that it's not synthetic in terms of cases and case law and other stuff. But the argument that they were making was easily overcomable, easily fought against. And so they knew their position was not strong, and they chose to take a path that would make it so nobody could fight their position, even though it was a weak position.
So you're asserting that they tried to make a change and keep everybody in the dark about it?
100%.
Okay.
Without question, that is what happened.
So the funny thing about our lawsuit is that it's not a sexy lawsuit, right? It's not pretty, it's not attractive, it's an APA violation. I mean, we haven't even gotten to the merits of the case yet. We were able to get this injunction because the Department of State Health Services overstepped.
It's been to the Supreme Court twice now.
I know, it's in the Supreme Court right now, Texas Supreme Court.
So obviously somebody thinks it's a big deal.
Well, my point is that it's not a sexy lawsuit, right? Like the Arkansas one, way sexier than this one.
Yeah.
But I feel like it's my belief that this lawsuit made other people feel like it was okay to sue.
Yeah.
So we have lawsuits in South Dakota, Maryland, Florida, like all these different, and I'm not naming, New York has over 20 lawsuits against the Office of Cannabis Management. So I feel like, I always say that the first guy through the wall always gets bloody. The first person through the wall always gets bloody. And that was us, right?
We're still in this lawsuit.
There's like,
this thing will not go away.
What do you call those things? Splinters? You're like still picking up the splinters.
That's always been a question of like, when will this lawsuit finish? And what's funny is every time we win anything, it just gets appealed and it just gets redirected. And so it's never ending. Which is fine. We're gonna keep fighting and keep doing it, and at some point somebody will make a decision somewhere, and then I'm sure it'll get appealed again.
I
wonder. I expect this lawsuit to continue throughout the course of our business.
Oh, I thought you were gonna say our lifetime.
I mean, I would be surprised if you told me you're gonna be in this lawsuit for the rest of your life. I'd be like, okay.
So how U.S. Congress said to the FDA, you need to do something about hemp. And the FDA says to Congress, well, you need to do something about hemp. And I wonder, because I don't actually know, if in Texas, the legislature's hoping the courts will fix it and the courts are hoping that the legislature will fix it. And in the interim, we're still having the fight on both sides.
Yeah.
We're hoping.
Yeah, and I mean, we aren't even discussing the federal side now. We're just talking state. So
correct.
We're at war within the state. We're also at war on the federal side.
Oh, yeah.
The federal side's a whole different animal. And there's
Again,
a lot,
not for the faint of heart.
Yeah, there's a lot more people involved in that one. And that one, luckily, we've got some really big allies that are working with us on the federal side.
So thank goodness. We are blessed to have a good circle of people that we work with. Yeah. So our case went to the appeals court last summer.
Yeah, it was my understanding that when we were granted the injunction, the state law required the state to appeal it, and then we went to the appellate court.
Well, they appealed it to the Supreme Court. It got thrown out of the Supreme Court, and they told them to appeal at the lower court, which is what they did. And we had that hearing last September. I think it was right after Labor Day. We had that hearing.
Yeah.
And so it was a three-judge panel, and we were told at the time that it was going to take 7 or 8 months to get a response back from that panel, and we got it back in 3 weeks, and they upheld our injunction, which was amazing. Yeah. So then the state...
Which I took as meaning that we were very much in the right.
Correct.
The fact that they came back that quickly.
Yes, I took it the same way because everybody was it's going to take months and months and months, but they came back really quickly. And so the state appealed again, but this time to the Supreme Court, and Texas Supreme Court. And what they did was they said, hey, Supreme Court, this company and these other plaintiffs shouldn't have this injunction to begin with. You should throw out the entire case and make them start over again. And that was their initial plea to the Texas Supreme Court. And so our attorneys filed a response, And then the state filed a response, and it's just been going back and forth. So according to the state's latest filing in our case, their basis for throwing it out and starting all over again is that Delta-8 is synthetic, and so all they did was uphold a law they already had. And so, number one, Delta-8 is not synthetic. Well, and
correct.
Also, they're wrong. But they haven't, and I'm sharing this because it's public. I'm not giving anything away about our case or any secrets that we have or, strategies, whatever. This is all public record. So it says here that, Texas does not allow for synthetic THC. What is that?
K2 and Spice.
Okay.
So just so everybody's clear, K2 and Spice was, I don't know, maybe 10 years ago now?
Yeah.
Kind of when it was a thing, and it was these fully synthetic, weird stuff that was making people crazy, and people were dying, and so the products were made illegal, and rightfully so. They were, right. Lord, I still don't fully understand what the hell was in those products, and I don't think a lot of people do.
Right.
And so those were synthetic, and they were harmful, and they were subsequently made illegal. Now the state's position is, and I'll let you dive more into the details of it, but the state's position was that Delta-8 is also one of those products and synthetic, but it's not.
Well, so what's interesting is that Dishes apparently took the position that because Delta-8 is not referenced in the USDA definition, which is what Texas adopted for the most part, that then Delta-8 must be illegal and any other THC must be illegal because it's not referenced in the USDA definition of hemp.
But that's incorrect because the Farm Bill references hemp as all cannabinoids.
Why, yes, it does. So they have a line here, and it says, as vendors, they're talking about us, recognize the amount of THC naturally occurring is minuscule, minute. As a result, concentrated amounts are typically manufactured from hemp-derived CBD. And then right after that, they add a line in, 5 things to know about THC-derived Delta-8. And they link to this FDA website. So I went to the FDA website. The 5 things that you need to know are Delta-8 products have not been evaluated or approved by the FDA.
By the way, that's most products in existence have not been evaluated and approved by the FDA.
They
just so we're clear about
evaluate and approve drugs and medical devices, not all this other stuff. The FDA has received adverse reports involving Delta-8 containing product.
They've received adverse reports on probably everything, including cinnamon, aspirin, water. People die from water every year, overconsumption, like lettuce with E. coli. I mean, there's literally, name a product and the FDA has received complaints.
Number 3, Delta-8 THC has psychoactive and intoxicating effects. Number 4, Delta-8 products often involve use of potentially harmful chemicals to create the concentrations claimed in the marketplace. The natural amount is very low, and additional chemicals are needed to convert other cannabinoids in hemp, like CBD, into Delta-8. Synthetic conversion, because it's not naturally occurring. They're saying the conversion is synthetic, okay? However, the USDA Farm Bill says nothing about the method of conversion, right? It doesn't say anything about how that has to happen. Additionally, I did some research and I looked up aspirin, and I'll read it to you. Aspirin is prepared by a chemical synthesis from salicylic acid through acetylation with acetic anhydride. Then I looked up supplements. Centrum, which is one of the best-selling supplements on the market.
Centrum Silver?
Strictly synthetic. These nutrients are manufactured in a lab, but they are on the market and they're sold in Texas. You can buy aspirin in Texas, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think you can buy Centrum too.
Yeah.
Anyway, so, and then number 5, Delta-8 products should be kept out of reach of children and pets. We have no argument with this, but the state
they cite it there like it's this huge...
They cite it like it's this huge thing, but they don't say anything about the method of conversion, and obviously, FDA is okay with aspirin and Centrum.
Yeah, that's...
Come on.
That's dirty.
It's dirty. It's no bueno. But listen, when you don't have a lot,
yeah, their argument's weak, so they've got to supplement with anything.
And we haven't even gotten to the merits of the case because we're still on, the initial injunction, which is the non-sexy part. Yeah. So it also says here that we have failed to establish jurisdiction, meaning we don't have standing because we have, so we got the temporary injunction, and according to this, we were not going to suffer substantial risk, right? And there was not anything impending that was going to happen to us. And so we shouldn't have been granted an injunction.
Our company was going out of business.
Not according to this guy. Not according to these folks. According to the state, we had nothing to worry about, okay? But what's interesting is that they use the HIA, Hemp Industries Association, versus the DEA. They cite this case from 2022 to show that we do not have standing. They're using that case. What they fail to mention is that the HIA sued the DEA 3 times successfully. And this time, the only reason they lost was because they had not been enforced on against the FDA. The judge says it's a technicality.
DEA or FDA?
DEA.
Okay.
The judge said, and you can read it in the thing, that if they had actually been enforced against by the DEA, it would have been a different ruling. But they didn't have standing because nothing had happened yet. But in our case, we were actually threatened with being put out of business.
Yeah.
Yeah. So they used this case.
Put in jail.
That sadly we are very familiar with, sadly for them. So they do that. And then we go over here to the commissioner acted pursuant to the Texas Health and Safety Code to ensure that synthetic THCs remain Schedule I controlled substances. Great. They're already controlled substances. We didn't try to change that. Spice and K2 are still controlled substances. What is Schedule I? Nobody argued that because Delta-8 is not synthetic.
Correct.
Okay, so the state says vendors are wrong on the substance. They mean the substance of our argument that got us the injunction. They are saying that we are wrong because under the text of the Farm Bill, all synthetically derived Delta-8 THC remained a Schedule I controlled substance.
Now, that is true, but doesn't apply to this case or us because nothing that we make is synthetically derived.
Correct, and we're not arguing that synthetic Delta-8 is not a Schedule I. Keep it a Schedule I. We're not arguing that.
They're trying to say that what we make is synthetic, therefore it should be a Schedule I, and therefore it's illegal.
Yes, correct.
Got it.
And they are incorrect. Okay, then over here, they say it, true, the IFR, that's the interim final rule, that the USDA and eventually the DEA put out, expanded the 2018 Farm Bill by deeming Delta-8 THC derived from hemp not to be a controlled substance under Schedule I. So they said it. It's in there.
They're agreeing with us.
Correct. They're agreeing with the federal government. And this is all we're saying, right? This is all we're saying. So then it says here, but assuming that is consistent with federal law, and it is likely not. So they're saying that the Farm Bill definition is not consistent with federal law. Federal law still doesn't preclude Texas from adopting a different approach with respect to potentially dangerous Delta-8 regulation under state law. But the assumption here is that the Delta-8 that they're talking about is synthetic. So none of this applies because we're not selling anything that's synthetic.
Their argument is actually correct for synthetic Delta-8.
Correct.
Their argument is correct for synthetic Delta-8.
Yes.
The thing is, our industry and what we do is not synthetic. It's not synthetic Delta-8.
That is correct.
So therefore, that argument, even though it's correct, does not apply. So they're using an argument for something that we don't do to say what we do is illegal.
Right. And so when they also talk about the federal definition, which they're saying is probably wrong, they're saying the federal definition is probably wrong. I go to a lawsuit called AK Futures versus Boyd Street Distribution, or Distro. And it says here, clear statutory text overrides a contrary agency interpretation. See Chevron, and we're going to talk about Chevron. But the important thing here is the Farm Act's definition of hemp does not limit its application according to the manner by which derivatives, extracts, and cannabinoids are produced. Rather, it expressly applies to all such downstream products so long as they do not cross the 0.3% Delta-9 threshold.
Correct.
And that was a federal case in federal court.
Perfect.
Yes. So, back to this publicly available information. The commissioner took action to keep synthetically derived cannabinoids unlawful. Do you, boo? We're not pushing synthetically derived cannabinoids. Nothing we sell is controlled substance.
Synthetic cannabinoids are already illegal.
Exactly.
So this whole thing serves no purpose. They're arguing that something is illegal that is already illegal.
Correct. Then it says, the commissioner then updated the Texas schedule's definition of THC to reflect that under Texas law, Delta-8 THC remains a Schedule I controlled substance. I disagree, and I haven't had a chance to talk to our lawyers about this, but what this is implying is that they knew about Delta-8 before our industry even got started, and that it had already been included in the controlled substance list.
Not true.
I know. And then it just keeps going on and on about how they did notice the meetings properly and how we just chose not to show up. And so our case is that what they did was illegal. That's why we got the injunction.
Let me put it this way.
Put it away. Go ahead.
So this is in Austin, right? We're in the state capitol. And they did a hemp meeting for regulatory stuff, and nobody showed up. I could literally right now go put a meetup on Facebook for hemp in Texas, and there'd probably be 50 people that show up.
Agree.
So the fact that they could do this and nobody would show up is craziness.
It makes zero sense. It's not within the realm of possibility. Yeah. Because at least one business owner is going to show up. So anyway, they continue that our claim that they acted illegally or improperly, they claim that we are incorrect. And so they cite all these cases. So the APA, that's the Administrative Procedures Act, they're saying it provides no basis for this lawsuit because we're saying that it was an illegal, it was a violation of the APA. And they're saying, we didn't violate anything. We did everything exactly the way we were allowed to, and we should have, and done. Mm-hmm. And they poo-poo the whole non-searchable text image thing. So, and
this is why I say we're always at war, right? Because it's the games being played are not, it's not being played on a level playing field. It's not being played fairly.
So the wrap up to this is granting the temporary injunction was an abuse of discretion.
Ooh.
That's hard, right? That's
spicy.
harsh.
That stings.
I know, it hurts a little bit. For many of the same, it was an abuse of discretion to enter a temporary injunction against...
So now they're saying the judge was wrong.
Yes, full on. Against the commissioner because the injunction would not remedy vendors' alleged harms. Those alleged harms were loss of revenue and having to close the business.
We lost millions having to shut down in the way that we did for the time that we did. It was savage. We almost went out of business.
Also, they make the case in here that it wasn't enough to be threatened by the potential ban, that we would have had to have been enforced upon for us to have experienced real harms.
But we had to cease selling, otherwise we would potentially face criminal action.
What? But those things don't make sense.
Cynthia, I've been hearing a lot about the sort of Chevron Deference ruling that just recently came out. Explain to me what this is, why it's important, how it plays in our industry. I think this is, a lot of people know that it's important, but I don't think everybody fully understands why.
Well, so Chevron deference started back in 1984. It was under the Reagan administration. So we're all too young to have felt an impact or thought it was something, right? But anyway, so, and I printed this out. It's Spike Cohen, and it was on Twitter.
So
Twitter X.
This comes from a lawsuit in the 80s.
Chevron versus, I don't know if it was the EPA.
Chevron, the oil company, right?
Chevron, the oil company, versus the EPA or somebody, right? But it was an environmental group. And so basically, Ronald Reagan was like, hey, courts need to defer to agencies because they are the experts and they know what they're doing. And so and he was really trying to roll things back. And there were all these environmental groups that were suing to force things to happen. And he was like, no, let the agency decide. So that became known as Chevron Deference.
So it gave the agencies sort of overreaching control over a lot of stuff.
Well, it was meant to stop people from going to the courts to try to get a decision and basically put it back in the agency's hands. But what happened, anytime you have the possibility of bureaucratic abuse is that agencies just kept expanding and expanding their power and just making up arbitrary rules all the time. So, for example, USPS including vape devices in the PACT Act, right? That was an overreach.
Yeah.
Right?
100%.
So they just decided randomly that I don't know if it was random. Seems like they gave it a lot of thought.
I love the example they give in this, and I'll read it. A family fishing company, Loper Bright Enterprises, was being driven out of business because they couldn't afford the $700 per day they were being charged by the National Marine Fisheries Service to monitor their company. The thing is, federal law, and I'm quoting this from Spike Cohen, the thing is, federal law doesn't authorize the National Marine Fisheries Service to charge businesses for this. They just decided to start doing it in 2013. So that's a perfect example, and that's if I'm not mistaken, that's the lawsuit that overturned it.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, so it made its way to the Supreme Court, and it was like, hey, these agencies have really abused their power. So what's interesting is that we live in a society where, it seems like half the population is like, we need more government, and then the other half is like, we need less government. And so the issue with Chevron, while it started out as a good thing, right? It was meant to stop overreach or telling the courts to defer to the agencies. It did not foresee that agencies would just continue to abuse their power and expand and make these arbitrary rules that everybody suddenly has to deal with.
Yeah.
Right? And so when an agency makes a rule or just makes an arbitrary decision, like in this case, what did you say? $700 a day, these guys were going to go broke. Right, and it should have been up to the agency to pay the inspector's fees, not the boat owner. Yeah. So when an agency does that or exerts that kind of overreach, there are financial impacts to the business. For example, our lawsuit, and put a bow on this whole thing, our lawsuit, Dish has just decided, hey, we're gonna put a non-searchable image as the thing, which is not how we normally do it, but now, for this case, this is how we're going to do it. Yep. And we're suddenly deciding that this compound, which has been made federally legal, we don't like it, so we're going to say that it's illegal.
Outside of a legislative session.
Outside of a legislative session, we're going to do this. And that is another example. So Chevron being overturned is really good. Think about all the agencies that you believe have overreached in some way. It's a lot.
Laws should not be able to be created by simply putting a note on a website. Just going to throw that out there.
Yes, that is a fair assessment.
Yeah, only our elected representatives should be able to pass laws, not government agencies with unelected bureaucrats.
Well, that's the thing. You deal with a bureaucrat. They have a job no matter what. It doesn't matter. I'm not going to name the state because they already hate me. But I've gotten into arguments with a particular state about them telling me something is, I had one where I had to show them in their own books. I was like, look here and now look here and tell me that this is illegal. And they were like, oh yeah. And this is like all these attorneys that work for this particular state agency. And it's like, they have a paycheck no matter what. It doesn't matter if they're wrong, right? Just waste your time, drag it out.
And that's the Texas thing is, it doesn't impact anybody in the state. Us going out of business and then the state putting us out of business doesn't impact the state.
Oh, no.
It's us.
Absolutely.
It's the families that we represent. It's now the 50,000 jobs in the hemp industry in Texas, right?
I remember talking to the former FDA commissioner, he was the director of the Center for Tobacco Products. But anyway, he's gone from there now. I'm pretty sure he went to work for a cigarette company. So
no.
What? For $1 million a year. That's a fact, $1 million a year. But anyway, I remember him saying one day, because I brought up with him that if they didn't handle the, vape and harm reduction angle properly, they could put all these vape businesses out of business.
That's what they were trying to do.
And he said, the FDA doesn't care about business. Oh, okay. So when you have a bureaucrat, you could have, in Louisiana, the Department of Health in Louisiana, this person is gone. They've been gone almost 2 years now. But there was a guy who literally was holding businesses hostage with the approvals. One person. And you could talk to anybody and they'd say, oh, it's that guy. Get rid of that guy. They couldn't get rid of him because he had so much time as a civil servant, and you can't just fire a civil servant. Like the whole government thing is just like, it's a hot mess. Like the whole, I would say wipe the slate clean and start over, but I don't even know how you could do that. But anyway, the point is that you can have a business or an entire industry tied up because of one person, a bureaucrat in an agency that oversteps. So the lawsuit is currently sitting in the Supreme Court. There's really no jurisdiction because the Supreme Court is deciding whether...
Supreme Court of Texas.
Yes. They're deciding whether they're going to hear it or not. And now they've asked, as a result of the state's last brief that was filed, they've decided that they want more information from both sides. So the state has to file their brief by July 22nd. We have to file by August 12th. And then the state gets a chance to reply to our brief by August 27th.
What happens if we lose this?
We file for another injunction.
Is it, at that moment, would the entire industry be done? Is it?
If
we were to lose this, does the entire industry essentially have to shut down?
Oh yeah, everybody, not just
Immediately.
us. Yes. If they grant their motion to just revoke the injunction and call it a day, there's not going to be a grace period. They're not going to give us a year's sell-through time. There's not going to be any of that. It's over.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that's important, and that's why I say we're always at war, is because we're fighting for our families, we're fighting for the families of everybody in this industry in Texas, and really everybody in the country. If we lose this case, industry's done.
Yeah, I believe you're the same way. I'm always like head on a swivel. Just like what's coming at us next? How does it affect us?
You have to.
Yeah, and I read a lot of stuff that theoretically might not have anything to do with us, but sometimes you can connect the dots and you're like, hey, this thing can help us over here. And we've done it successfully a few times. We've connected dots and it's worked out well. So what the state decides to do, maybe there'll be a legislative fix. We're probably going to end up end up in trial around the same time we end up going back to the legislative session. Yeah. So these things could be happening concurrently, which would not be great. It would be great if the state dropped the case. They're not going to. Obviously, we're not going to. So if we can get a legislative fix that might influence the trial if we haven't gotten to trial yet by some miracle. So we'll see.
Okay. Yeah, this lawsuit has been a big part of my life for the past few years. Cynthia's as well, Lewis as well, all of us. This is something that we've been pretty heavily tied up in and fighting with every day. So we appreciate all the support. We appreciate everybody that stands behind us and supports us and donates to us and buys our products. Thank you guys for everything. You guys allow us, guys and girls, you guys allow us to be here, and you allow us to continue this fight and continue to do what we do. So we can't thank you enough. And as always, happy hunting. Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next week.